Hello and welcome to Merlin's Manor. Today I'm going to be giving my thoughts on Gloomhaven Buttons and Bugs, which is a streamlined, small box solo version of Gloomhaven, published by Cephalofair Games and designed by Joe Clipful and Nikki Valens, with the campaign story written by Isaac Childress. Gloomhaven is currently my favorite game of all time, and so I was excited to try out this streamlined solo version of Gloomhaven. There are 20 scenarios and the 6 starter characters from Gloomhaven. As I go through my thoughts on this game, there will be naturally times where I compare it to its big brother. I have played through the campaign 3 times with 3 different characters, and I've played on both standard and hard difficulty. Before we get into my thoughts on the game, I'm going to give a brief gameplay overview. You will begin by choosing a character to play as, and then set up the scenario as instructed on the scenario card. Each character comes with 4 level 1 cards and 4 level 2 cards. You're going to start with all of your level 1 cards, and each new level you can choose to switch out 1 level 1 card for a level 2 card until finally at level 5 you'll have all 4 level 2 cards. The cards are double-sided. You'll start with your cards on side A, and when you use them, you'll flip them to side B and return them to your hand. And after playing the B side, you'll discard the card. Every round, you're going to play 2 cards and then choose to do the top action of one of the cards and the bottom action of the other card. You also select the number on one of your 2 cards to be your initiative, determining when you will act in the round compared to monsters. The monsters' initiatives are tied to the 3 actions that they do, and that will be selected by rolling a die, which will have you select one of those 3 actions. Each scenario has its own goal, which is mostly kill all enemies. You have to efficiently take out enemies while avoiding taking too much damage. After you've used all of your cards, you'll need to rest to get your cards back, and you'll lose one of your cards permanently. You can also choose to lose a card or discard cards to keep from taking damage. If your HP drops below 1 or you no longer have 2 cards to play, then you lose the game. As you play through the campaign, you'll get new items from each scenario, and you can choose to bring in up to 2 hand items and a number of pouch items based on your level. Each scenario, you can bring in whichever items you have unlocked up to those limits, so you don't lock yourselves into items that you used in previous scenarios. You're also able to choose which level 2 cards to bring into each scenario, so you're also not locked into your previously chosen level 2 cards. You can play the game as one-off scenarios or play through the campaign, with certain scenarios being skipped depending on which character you are playing as. You play about 14 out of the 20 scenarios. You can also adjust the difficulty by changing out cards for the enemy attack modifiers. You also level up your own character's modifiers as you go. Those are the basics of how you play the game. There is, of course, a lot more involved, as you have a bunch of different effects that are added and elements that you use to do some actions. I have a full how to play and playthrough, which I'll link to at the end of this video and in the description down below. Now let's get into the game review itself, starting with art and components. The first thing I'd like to point out is that they packed a lot into this small box. Every card is double-sided, from the character action cards to enemy cards to modifier cards and scenario cards and so on, which allowed them to include more content than they otherwise could have in this small box. The cards themselves are small, with many of the cards being mini Euro size, and the scenarios are all printed on standard size cards with the story, text, and setup on one side, and the actual board that you're going to be playing on the other side with icons for setup on there. The game comes with these tiny miniatures for the characters, and then just 4 colored cubes for enemies, which are supposed to match up with these health dials, but the colors are a bit off. And my biggest gripe in the components is actually that some of the colors for the dials look similar enough that at a glance it's hard to tell the difference. Had they made the colors of the dials closer to the cube colors, then they would be much clearer to differentiate, but they went with a very dark color for the dials, which led to the similarity. This is mainly a problem with the original version, and I've heard that this has been fixed with the second printing. The game comes with some nice dual-layered cards here that have inserts for you to move the cubes along for the attack modifiers, as well as for the monster actions here, and so you can just move those to where they belong. That's very nice there. Now, as far as the artwork goes, all of the artwork is good. There isn't a lot of artwork in this game, with the main artwork being the characters in their character cards and the enemies on their cards, but they all look great. I would even say better than the original Gloomhaven, which was good as well for the art for the characters and the enemies. The scenarios themselves have fairly basic artwork for the most part, but they look good, and since each scenario is contained on a card, instead of generic tiles that you put together, they are more customized for each scenario. And there are obstacles and difficult terrain printed directly on the cards that look good and fit with each scenario. All the artwork helps immerse you into the game and looks great. One final gripe I have about components is the rulebook. To save space, they only included about a third of the rules, and to read the rest of the rules, you have to go online and download them. This is very inconvenient and makes learning the game take an extra step, and is inconvenient for double-checking rules to the point where there were times I just applied what seemed right in the moment instead of taking the time to look up the rules, which I would have done had I had the rules right in front of me. I could have just looked them up very easily. And so I wish they just included all the rules in the rule book that was printed out for you and provided. Now let's go ahead and get into the ease of play. The game is not easy to learn. If you have already learned how to play Gloomhaven, then learning buttons and bugs will not be too hard to learn what is new. But Gloomhaven in general is a very complex game, and much of that complexity is carried over in this game. In addition to the high complexity of standard Gloomhaven, I found how the elements work to be very convoluted, and at times I would forget and have to remind myself by rereading the rulebook. And a few times I may have just assumed that I remembered right. The elements work much more smoothly in standard Gloomhaven than in buttons and bugs. Another more complex thing in buttons and bugs is negating damage, which honestly needs to be more complex due to the double-sided cards. Now, at first I found it hard to remember and kept having to reference the rulebook. At least this was in the printed section of the rulebook, so I didn't have to go online to get that. But basically you can discard one side A card from hand, or discard two side B cards from hand, or lose a card from the discarded cards. This takes into account the difference in value from cards in various degrees of use, and is necessary with how few cards you have to begin with, but adds just a bit more to learn and remember. It would have been nice if they had at least included this info on a player aid for quick reference. I did find the dice use pretty intuitive in the game, with there being three symbols, the plus, the minus, and the 0, which match up with the actions for the monsters as you roll to see what they will do and when they will act, as well as the attack modifiers. On BGG, the complexity rating shows quite a big divide between the full-size Gloomhaven and this game, but I think they are much closer in complexity than the gap implies there on BGG. And there are some ways this game felt more complex, but it could come with me having already learned some of the standard Gloomhaven rules first and just finding some of the changes to be a bit harder to grasp the new way of doing things. Long story short, if you are familiar with standard Gloomhaven, then this won't be too hard to learn the new rules here, but if this is your introduction to Gloomhaven, then it is going to be a little on the complex side to learn everything, and having only part of the rulebook included in the box doesn't help matters. Now let's get into my review of the gameplay itself. I enjoy the gameplay. It keeps a lot of the things that made the original Gloomhaven great. The characters I have played so far feel like the characters from the main game, with some tweaks that help with solo play. The game is balanced well to work as a solo game, though to be fair, I have not yet played as the Tinkerer, which seems like it would be the most difficult character to play without other characters playing alongside, but they did change up the Tinkerer's abilities to be less of a support character. The double-sided cards do work well, adding an extra depth of strategy in that you have to work your way to your secondary abilities. I do personally prefer having all the cards available to choose from like you do in regular Gloomhaven, but this does add an interesting twist to the game while enabling the game to keep its small size. The dice system works well, though again I do prefer the card system in regular Gloomhaven. I also found it difficult to remember to advance the cubes when you are doing your attacks, which isn't necessary in the original Gloomhaven because you're just flipping over cards. But here you have to actually move your cube down each time you do an attack and each time the monster attacks. You do have a bit more predictability when planning attacks and buttons and bugs, though, because you know it will be one of 3 outcomes. You know exactly when there is a possibility of getting the crit or getting the null. It is unfortunate that advantage does not guarantee not getting a null, and disadvantaged enemy can still have a crit, because all it does is make you roll the dice twice, and for advantage you take the better option, and for disadvantage you take the worst option of the 2, and of course the die can land on the same side twice. I like how you can tweak your items and leveled up cards based on the scenario. If you have more enemies with shields this scenario, maybe take in an item that will give you pierce. If the scenario is more focused on survival, take shielding items. In original Gloomhaven, you would buy items and typically just keep bringing the same items in for each scenario with maybe a couple extra items for switching out, and you are stuck with the leveled up cards that you chose. There's no switching out cards. Buttons and Bugs gives you the entire lineup of items that you have unlocked to choose from each scenario, and so you can customize to each scenario. The system also allows for you to play one-off scenarios since nothing is really carried over. Just choose your lineup and which cards to level up. The amount of cards to level up, of course, being based on the scenario's level. I personally rather play through the campaign for the progression, but for those who want to just jump into scenarios with their leveled up cards already, the system works well to allow you to do that. Overall, I feel like this game captures the feel of Gloomhaven while streamlining some things and downsizing everything to fit into a small space. The games have taken me between 15 and 35 minutes, with most games taking between 25 and 30 minutes, of course not including setup and selecting items and cards to bring in. Each scenario feels like an optimization puzzle, from selecting of items and leveled up cards to the order of playing your cards. In fact, there were a few games I lost and knew exactly why I lost, such as I brought in the wrong leveled up card for the scenario, and I could just fix that one thing and I'd win the next time round. With the dice rolling, the game does feel a little more dependent on luck at times than standard Gloomhaven, since mitigation is less, with dice being able to roll the same thing multiple times in a row, which can be problematic when enemies roll invisibility 3 times in a row or something else equally annoying. Though with a modifier track, some luck is lessened in that sense, so to a degree it balances out a bit as far as the luck goes. Like Big Gloomhaven, this game does suffer from most of the game simply having the goal, kill all enemies. Though the couple scenarios that changed that up really felt unique, and I greatly appreciated those different goals, which gave a different puzzle to solve. I wish they'd included more scenarios with unique goals. While I do enjoy Buttons and Bugs Big Brother more, this one is easier to get to the table, provides a true solo mode where you don't have to play two-handed, and it's much easier to take on trips, so it definitely has its place. There are many times when I don't have the time or energy to play full-size Gloomhaven, but Buttons and Bugs can fill in that gap when I want to play a quicker to set up and play version of Gloomhaven. Now let's talk about replayability. This game does get a bit repetitive with only having 20 scenarios, with each character having one character-specific scenario, but you'll be repeating most of the others as you play the campaign. What does keep it fresh is that you have 6 different characters, all with their own unique cards with class-specific abilities that change up the gameplay quite a bit, as well as upgrades to attack modifiers that are specific to each class. I've enjoyed playing through as the Silent, which is known as the Scoundrel in original Gloomhaven, the Mind Thief, and the Cragheart. And I look forward to playing as the 3 others eventually, though I will probably take some time off before engaging in the others. I believe you play about 14 scenarios for each character, which if you won every game, you would have to play 84 games to play through the campaigns as each character, and that is assuming no losses and replaying those scenarios until you win. I could see this game getting you around 100 plays or more as long as you pace yourself and take breaks between campaigns so as not to get burnt out on replaying basically the same campaign 6 different times. The different characters do change up the game enough to make it enjoyable to play through multiple times to experience a different puzzle to solve with each character. You can also adjust the difficulty if you're finding the game too easy after a while, or down to easy if you're finding it too hard to play. Being able to adjust the difficulty adds to the replayability sum as well, but I would note that the difficulty only modifies how hard the enemies hit via the attack modifier track and does not add HP to enemies or change up their actions in any way. Increasing HP was a major way that the original Gloomhaven ramped up the difficulty, and this version does not include that way of increasing difficulty. Enemies are always just as easy to take out in this game, you'll just be adjusting how hard they hit, which will make it harder to survive, but doesn't add much from an efficiency perspective as increasing HP did in the original Gloomhaven. Overall, this game does get a good score for me on the replayability front, despite only having 20 scenarios. Now let's talk about the theme for a moment. This game is quite thematic. You are not exploring dungeons as you are only going to be in one room for each scenario, but you are facing off against monsters, and there is a storyline that is good as well. They also work into the game an explanation for why everything is so small. So this isn't just a miniaturized version of Gloomhaven representing full-size Gloomhaven. The size of everything is part of the theme. The game loses a little when it comes to immersion in that the enemies are just represented by these cubes instead of standees or miniatures, but that is necessary to condense this game down into such a small box, and it does also aid in quicker setup, so there is a small trade-off there for that quickness of setup and fitting into the box versus theme. Now let's get into my final thoughts on the game. If you follow the channel, you might know that I rate the original Gloomhaven and Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion 10 out of 10. While I do enjoy this game, I don't rate it quite so high. I'm giving Gloomhaven Buttons and Bugs an 8 out of 10. There are a few things about the gameplay that I'm not as fond of, plus part of what has led me to such a high ranking of Gloomhaven is all the unlockables along the way and the large, immersive campaign that you go through. Buttons and Bugs is still a solid game and worthwhile for a quicker to set up and play game that can also be more easily brought on trips. It is also nice to be able to play this game true solo, that is to play it solo with only one character. If you enjoy Gloomhaven and enjoy playing these types of games solo, then you will probably enjoy Buttons and Bugs, but don't expect it to reach the heights of the big box Gloomhaven. This game is still quite satisfying, but it does not fully fill the shoes of Gloomhaven as a solo-only option. It will likely give you more games than Jaws of the Lion, but not as many as Gloomhaven or Frosthaven, and the repetition of the same scenarios may leave you wanting more, though exploring the various characters and leveling them up to get better card abilities has been giving me something to keep me coming back for. I hope you found this video helpful in determining if Gloomhaven Buttons and Bugs is a game for you. I'm enjoying playing it still and look forward to playing as the Spellweaver, Bruiser, and the Tinkerer. I encourage you to check out my How to Play video here, or this review of Gloomhaven here. I hope you have a great week, and keep on gaming.